Hey quilters, it's Patti Carey of Pattispatchwork. Thank you for joining the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along event celebrating the 10th anniversary of Northcott's iconic Stonehenge O Canada collection. I'm so glad you're here. Together we're going to make this stunning Quilts of Valor size quilt. This month we're working on Block 2. Here's what you need to get started. Along with the C6 pieces we cut for month 1, we're also going to need fabrics F, G, and H. Cut all of the pieces and label them as indicated. We're going to take our G1 pieces and our H3 squares. I've drawn a line on H3. We're making 4 at a time, no waste flying geese. We lay 2 squares in opposite corners of our G1 and we stitch 1/4 of an inch each side of the line. I like to place the upper square on top of the lower square so that it doesn't get caught when I sew over the seam the first time. We stitch 1/4 of an inch each side of that drawn line, and then we cut along the line and we'll press our seam toward H3. Then I take the remaining squares of H3 and place them in the remaining corners of G1. I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch each side of the line. My stitching line will be at the V created by the 2 H patches. We're going to chain piece down the first side of the line on both of our units. Then we flip it around and we chain piece back down the other side of the line to complete our 4 flying geese units. We cut along the line and we'll finger press our seams toward fabric H. Trim the tips if you wish as you go. Now we build our center block with our F2 piece and our G4 squares. And we're going to chain piece them in columns. So I'm sewing the second unit in row 1 to the first piece in row 1, then the second piece in row 2 to the first unit in row 2, then the second unit in row 3 to the first piece in row 3. I'm going to finger press towards F2 and the corner squares, and then I'm going to add the third column. I'm going to pin my pieces in place so that everything stays correctly aligned. And keep my patches aligned at top and bottom edges as I add the third piece in row 1 to the second piece in row 1, then the third unit in row 2 to the second unit in row 2, then the third piece in row 3 to the second unit in row 3. I finger press my seams towards the corner and towards F2. Now I can sew the rows together. I nest the seams at the intersections of the corner squares and the F2 center square. You can actually feel if the seams are nested or not. You can feel a space in there if they're not nested. making sure those seams don't get flipped back. And there we have our corner units. We're going to make another set of 4 at a time no waste flying geese, this time with G1 and C6. We have 4 of these to make, so we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch each side of the drawn lines, then press the seams towards fabric C and add the remaining C6 squares, making sure our sewing line is at the V created by the C patches. Stitch 1/4 of an inch each side of that line and we cut them apart. Now we can do our flying geese sections. We're going to add our F1 pieces to the flying geese. I keep my flying geese unit on top so I can control the seam, and my F1 triangle extends 3/8 of an inch beyond the top and bottom edges of my flying geese unit. That is the correct placement. And we're going to sew all 4 of these and then finger press our seams toward F1, the direction of least resistance. Now we can add our G3 triangles to each edge of the unit. We align the top square corners of the triangle with the block, and our bottom tip of our G3 will cross the F1 angled edge at the 1/4 inch seam line. This is the tip at the top of page 3 in the pattern. Let's chain piece all 4 units, finger pressing our seam toward G3, and then we can add the remaining G3 triangle to the opposite side of the block. Again, aligning the top square corners and having the bottom tip of the triangle cross the F1 on the 1/4 inch seam line. Our stitching line will be at the V created by the G3 triangle and the F1 triangle. Chain piece all 4 and press the seam toward G3. Now we can add our H2 triangles to those angled edges. I like to sew with my flying geese unit on top, so I'm going to match the outer tips, and my H2 triangle, the tip will extend 3/8 of an inch below the bottom edge of my flying geese section. I'm using my pointed end of my clover heron marker for applique as a stiletto. Chain piece this first triangle on all 4 units, and we finger press our seam toward H2, the direction of least resistance. Now we can add the other triangle to each unit. Again, I like to sew with my flying geese unit on top. So I'm going to align my unit with my H2 triangle so that they cross at the 1/4 inch seam line, and the bottom tips will also match. By sewing with the flying geese section on top, I am able to control or manage those seams, making sure that they don't flip back the wrong way. I chain piece this triangle onto all 4 units. Using my heron marker as a stiletto. Then I finger press my seams towards H2. Now we can put our block together. Our center block, we put our flying geese H2 units on all 4 sides, and we add our corner units in each corner, making sure they're correctly aligned. Then we're going to chain piece column 2 to column 1. We have the second piece in row 1, adding it to the first unit in row 1, making sure our pieces match at top and bottom edges. Then the center block is sewn to the first unit in row 2. Keep those seams correctly flipped so that they don't flip back. And now we add the second unit in row 3 to the first unit in row 3. Now we chain piece the third column to the second column. I'll pin them in place to make sure they stay correctly aligned. And I'm sewing the third unit in row 1 to the second unit in row 1. And then the third unit in row 2 to the second unit in row 2. Keeping the patches aligned at top and bottom edges so that my block stays square. And finally, we add the third unit in row 3 to the second unit in row 3. All of the units in our block are now sewn together. Our block is virtually put together. All we need to do is sew the rows together. I'm going to finger press my seams toward those H2 triangles. And now sew row 1 to row 2. Nesting the seams where the corner units meet that center block. Again, you can feel if they're properly nested. I find I don't need to use pins if I can just feel and make sure that those pieces stay nested. And then we also sew the second row to the first row. I'm going to finger press my seams toward H2. And our block is together. And here you have block 2. Make sure to head on over to the Northcott Instagram page to enter in their month 2 block 2 giveaway. If you haven't already done so, please pop onto my website as well, pattispatchwork.com, to sign up for the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along newsletter. In it, I share extra tips and tricks on how you can get your blocks done. I've also set up a Facebook group for the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along, so if you're on Facebook, please check it out. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you back here next month for Block 3.